I am Dracula.
Bela Lugosi. I remember him scaring the daylights out of me when I was a kid.
He got that stigma on him, a vampire, it lived with him for the rest of his life.
There you will bring the coffin. It's my native soil.
Dracula equals Bela Lugosi equals Dracula.
Doesn't Dracula ever end for you? No. Dracula never ends.
He was the epitome of the suave, cultured European actor. His continental manners, dark good looks, and imposing presence made him an ideal candidate for the kind of romantic heroes he longed to play. But for millions of audiences around the world, Bela Lugosi would forever be associated with one role, that of the bloodthirsty Transylvanian aristocrat, Count Dracula. Ironically, it was in Transylvania on October 20th, 1882, in the quiet town of Lugos, Hungary, that Bela Ferenc Dejo Blasco was born. The youngest of 4 children born to Paula and Istvan Blasco, Bela showed little enthusiasm for school. He much preferred music and singing, interests that were not shared by his banker father, a strict disciplinarian who expected his son to follow in the footsteps of his older brothers and learn a conventional trade. But from an early age, Bela demonstrated a headstrong nature that rivaled that of his father, and the tension that grew between them was fierce and palpable.
He left home when he was 12 years old to go out and make his way in the world. My father at that time wanted to quit school and had an ambition to be an actor, and so he worked starting when he was very young and was independent. His parents thought that he should stay in school, and so apparently there was quite a rift between my father and his parents.
Bela had no further contact with his family until 1 year later, when he was stunned by news of his father's death. Frustrated in his efforts to find stage work, the teenager toiled in mines and worked as a machinist. But adversity only fueled the boy's theatrical ambitions.
He always wanted to be an actor, and he finally achieved it just by perseverance. I remember him saying that he hung around the stage door of the stages there in Hungary, and finally somebody gave him something to do on the stage.
Bela Blasco made his first recorded stage appearance at the age of 20 and was soon appearing regularly with regional theater companies in a variety of roles.
He told me on the stage in Hungary, he had played Hamlet, Macbeth, a lot of the wonderful classical roles. And I was very, very impressed, to the point of where I said, wow, you did those things, really? So that when you deal with the Bela Lugosi, you're dealing with what was a very good actor.
The early decades of the 20th century were a golden age for the Hungarian theater, due in no small part to the international reputation of the country's leading dramatist, Ferenc Molnár. His exquisitely crafted plays, such as Lilium, The Devil, and The Guardsman, offered tremendous opportunities to an actor of Bela's talent, looks, and burning ambition. It was this ambition that prompted him to adopt a series of stage names in an effort to secure as many roles and as many chances for fame as possible.
He performed under the name Aristide Olt and maybe other names. It was somewhere early in his career, though, that he adopted the name Lugosi after the town Lugos where he was born.
At the age of 28, Bela Lugosi was given one of his most important breaks. He was chosen to take over the male lead in a 1910 production of Romeo and Juliet. Lugosi's lusty interpretation of Shakespeare's star-crossed lover proved controversial and popular.
He was obviously a very gifted person. He had a very powerful presence on the stage and off the stage. And he was the type of person who went to the utmost lengths to perfect his craft and his trade. He used to tell me about how long and how hard he would work at each role that he would play. This was so ingrained in his life that he was really first and foremost an actor.
By 1913, Lugosi had achieved every Hungarian actor's dream, an invitation to join the National Theatre of Budapest, one of the country's leading state-subsidized companies. Though his work was limited to supporting roles, the National Theatre offered him the chance to work with the most distinguished actors and directors of his generation, a generation soon lost to what became known as the Great War.
In World War I, in Hungary, actors were exempt from military service. My father nevertheless believed in the cause that his country was fighting in, and he did join the army. So he was on the front lines in the ski patrol and was injured there and finished the war, I believe, in the hospital, never was back in active duty again. At that time, he was a captain and received the equivalent of the Purple Heart for his injuries.
At war's end, the 35-year-old veteran returned to the National Theatre, where he continued to dazzle audiences with an almost messianic stage presence.
In Hungary, they had a system where you would be ranked, actually. Each actor would perform the same part as the years would go by, and they'd judge one actor against another performing all the classic roles. My father, for example, played Jesus, and he actually looked like Jesus in that part, or at least how Jesus, is normally depicted. And he rose in the ranks and eventually was ranked #1.
It was at this same time that Lugosi married Ilona Smik, the daughter of a prominent Budapest attorney. But their union was troubled from the start by Bela's hair-triggered jealousy and the fact that Ilona's parents disapproved of her husband's unstable theatrical career. To make matters worse, post-war Hungary was rife with political struggle, and the theatrical community forged alliances with the revolutionary regime in the hope of improving working conditions. Lugosi, among the most visible of the organizers, was branded as a traitor when the revolution failed. Fleeing with his wife to Vienna, Ilona's parents forced her to return to Budapest and file for divorce. Bela was devastated.
This woman who was his first love was really somebody who he always felt very strongly about. A woman who I think he always loved all his life.
Shortly after starring in his very first film, The Leopard, in 1917, Bela moved to Berlin and found employment in the thriving German film industry, playing featured roles in such films as F.W. Murnau's Der Johanniskopf, an early adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and The Deerslayer. But despite this success, Bela grew increasingly dissatisfied with life in Germany. Unable to return to Hungary, he worked his way across the Atlantic as a ship's engineer. Landing in New Orleans in the summer of 1921, he found his way to New York City, where he managed to obtain political asylum.
My father was a very well-read, far-thinking person. He had some vision or idea of the greatness that America would become. He was really a very profound American inside. That's what he would tell me. He really believed in this country.
Now living the life of a European exile, Bela married Viennese-born actress Ilona von Montag. But the marriage soon collapsed over issues of jealousy and professional rivalry. Unfamiliar with the English language, Bela attempted to start a Hungarian repertory company. When he did find work in English-speaking theaters, he memorized his lines phonetically, one syllable at a time. The result was a deliberate and highly inflected vocal style that would become his trademark.
Hungarian's very unusual in that here it is in the middle of Europe, unaffected by the Romance languages, unaffected by any of the languages, frankly, sounding unto itself. It's a very hard accent to lose. Lugosi could never get rid of it. He tried. He could sometimes almost get rid of it, but never quite,
Still smolderingly attractive at the age of 40, Lugosi scored a hit as the romantic Apache opposite Estelle Winwood in The Red Poppy in 1922. When his onstage lovemaking proved so passionate as to actually bruise his leading lady's ribs, Press agents wasted no time in promoting Lugosi as a major new sex symbol.
There was a sexuality about my father's persona, and I think he realized it. And so he prided himself as being able to make the women swoon.
But despite this newly found notoriety, Lugosi's heavily accented speech typed him to play foreigners, and usually villainous ones. It was a devastating blow to an actor who had always prided himself on range and versatility. In 1923, Lugosi made his American screen debut in Fox Films' The Silent Command, playing a master spy who plans to blow up the Panama Canal. In The Midnight Girl, a goateed Lugosi appeared in the role of a lecherous theatrical impresario. In 1927, Bela Lugosi was offered the leading role in a hit British stage play that was headed to Broadway. Tired of playing villainous stereotypes and disappointed by the part's lack of dialogue, he rejected the invitation. But when Raymond Huntley, the actor who had originated the part in London, also turned it down, Lugosi was asked to reconsider. The decision he made would change his life forever. On October 5th, 1927, Bela Lugosi's performance in Dracula took Broadway by storm. At the age of 44 and with hundreds of stage and screen roles behind him, Bela Lugosi had become a star.
When he did Dracula in 1927 on Broadway, it was startling. It was very sensual and very sexual. It wasn't something that was common.
It's the attractiveness of evil that Lugosi brought to that role, taking the continental romantic sex appeal of the Valentino type of actor that was very popular in the mid-20s, the slick back hair, the aquiline features, the almost hypnotic power over women. That combines with his thick Hungarian accent, making the character romantic. Nothing like it had been done before.
Flush with success, Bela was soon seen squiring dozens of wealthy and beautiful women. In 1929, he married Beatrice Woodruff Weeks, the millionaire heiress of San Francisco's Mark Hopkins Hotel. But Bela's third marriage was a complete disaster, lasting only 4 days. The enormous success of Dracula made a film version inevitable. Securing the rights to both the book and the stage play, Universal Pictures hoped to use Dracula to lure Lon Chaney, their once resident man of 1,000 faces, away from MGM. Chaney had been responsible for 2 of Universal's most successful fright films, The Hunchback of Notre Dame and The Phantom of the Opera. Unfortunately, within months of his triumph in The Unholy Three, the versatile actor was stricken with throat cancer and died in August 1930. But despite Chaney's death, Bela was still not among the actors under consideration for Dracula. Others mentioned included Chester Morris, Paul Muni, and the Austrian actor Conrad Veidt.
He told me about the other actors who were being considered, and he was really disappointed and surprised that he was not the first choice after he had been successful on Broadway in the play Dracula.
You may go.
While lobbying for the role, Lugosi had moved to Hollywood, where he honed his on-screen skills as a contract player at the William Fox Company.
How do you like that, my little radish?
You'd better go with him if you want those guns.
You think he got mad at me because I take you?
He'll never forgive you.
No. The Cayon is my friend. We don't fight over women. If I get tired of you, I give you back to him. What do I care?
Appearing in numerous bit parts and occasional featured roles, he often played exotic sheiks, European heavies, or corrupt businessmen.
Wait a minute, Joe. I don't get rough with the gunplay. I won't tell. I know you should bump me off, but I'd rather stay alive. Keep my mouth shut. You know me. I won't squawk.
It was also at this time that Bela began a torrid and highly publicized love affair with film star Clara Bow, America's it girl. The national embodiment of relaxed jazz-age morality, Bow's sexual exploits had become legendary, and her liaison with Broadway's most famous vampire only fueled public and private curiosity. But for Lugosi, the actress's charms were not enough to distract him from his ultimate goal, to star in Universal Pictures' upcoming production of Dracula. Barraging studio president Carl Laemmle with letters and telegrams, Bela finally got the part, for a total salary of $3,500. Directed by Todd Browning and released in 1931, just prior to Valentine's Day, Dracula became an international sensation, and Bela Lugosi was hailed as the new Lon Chaney.
I am Dracula.
It's really good to see you.
I bid you welcome.
Lugosi so well honed his role, doing it about 1,000 times on the stage, that he was prepared to exude everything that was required of the role when it was finally captured on the screen.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
Beneath the character of Count Dracula, there was a magnificent actor operating. And I believe that it was the thing that all good actors bring to a role. The sincerity, the concentration, the believability of being that character.
This is very old wine. I hope you will like it.
Aren't you drinking?
I never drink wine.
Bela Lugosi is perhaps the most outstanding purveyor of a very stylized, highly theatrical, melodramatic type of screen villainy that we hadn't seen prior to his type of portrayals, and we haven't seen since.
Van Helsing, you are too late. My blood now flows through her veins. She will live through the centuries to come, as I have lived.
And I will have Carfax Abbey torn down stone by stone, excavated a mile around. I will find your earth box and drive that stake through your heart.
Lugosi and his interpretation of Dracula, we have a marriage of sex and death. And I think that our ongoing fascination with both sex and death is very significant in his career and why he has become a cultural icon.
Now successful and confident of his future, Bela Lugosi became an American citizen. He was also sought after by the Hollywood press, who delighted in portraying him as a dark and mysterious European.
Well, would you like to play in any more mystery parts in the future?
Yes, why not? I see it. They're very interesting. But I would rather have it combined with some romance. It has a much greater appeal to the audience, and even the box office of the producers would gain more. Romance is very important.
Well, speaking of romance, do you ever go to any Hollywood parties?
No. I guess I'm pretty much of a lone wolf. I don't say I don't like people at all, but to tell you the truth, I only like them if I have a chance to look deep into their heart and in their mind. Besides, I don't even know how to play that, what do you call it, ukulele.
Realizing that horror movies were a potential bonanza, Universal Pictures rushed to feature their new star in a screen adaptation of Mary Shelley's classic, Frankenstein. Submitting to a makeup test, Bela disapproved of playing a mute role, especially one in which his handsome features would be buried under pounds of makeup.
He asked for the script, and there weren't any lines. And I think it was just a matter of pride. He considered himself an actor, and that having a role such as that where you just make grunts and other sounds wasn't anything that he wanted to do.
The part went instead to a relatively unknown 43-year-old actor named Boris Karloff.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Released just 8 months after Dracula, Frankenstein proved to be an even bigger hit. Universal now had 2 successors to Lon Chaney and lost no time in creating a slate of ever more macabre fright films.
Dr. Miracle in the Rue Morgue is guilty of 4 murders so far this week, and by now perhaps a 5th.
Directed by Robert Florey, Murders in the Rue Morgue offered Bela an opportunity to prove his range and versatility. But the film fared poorly with critics and audiences, and Universal declined to extend his contract. Boris Karloff, it seemed, was the studio's new horror superstar.
Lugosi made a mistake by not taking the monster. Had he played the monster, I think that he would have softened that image of the vampire. I think he would have gone on to be recognized by the audiences as a rather versatile actor who could do different things.
At last, I'm king of all.
Afraid of repeating what he considered the mistake of his life by turning down Frankenstein, Lugosi accepted virtually every job he was offered.
To the future, monsieur.
In 1932, he appeared in what is widely considered one of his best roles as the Voodoo Master in the independently produced horror classic White Zombie.
You must put the light back into her eyes and bring laughter to her lips.
You paint a charming picture, monsieur. One that I should like to see myself.
Although he excelled at playing powerful and commanding screen figures, the proud and at times temperamental Lugosi found himself typecast and powerless to secure a long-term studio contract. Nevertheless, he enjoyed a lavish Hollywood lifestyle, often living beyond his means. He savored the best wines, smoked the finest cigars, and dined at expensive restaurants. But a scant year after his triumph in Dracula, Bela was forced to file for bankruptcy. The role he had so badly wanted had become a trap. In the public's mind, Lugosi was Dracula.
Go, never dreaming I care, loving somebody somewhere, leaving me my silent love. Betty.
Betty. You have booped your last boob.
In February 1933, Bela Lugosi married his 4th wife, Lillian Arch, the 20-year-old daughter of a prominent Hungarian-American family.
When my father married my mother, there was about a 30-year age difference between them. In fact, my father and my mother's father were about the same age. She was a beautiful young woman when they were married and took care of him in every way.
His personal life stabilized, Lugosi's career also began to improve. In 1934, Universal Pictures explored the box office potential of teaming the stars of Frankenstein and Dracula in a series of fright films. The result was 3 of the most stylish and disturbing motion pictures ever made.
I leave my secret with you. More power than man has ever possessed. His face and hands will appear like phosphorus. If he touches anyone, they die.
Of course, many fans assumed the mutual animosity the actors displayed on screen reflected their off-screen sentiments as well, an assumption that was not discouraged by studio publicity.
My father spoke of Boris Karloff from time to time, but I never heard him say anything bad about Boris Karloff.
In 1935, Todd Browning, the director of Universal's Dracula, cast Lugosi in an almost identical role in MGM's Mark of the Vampire.
Watch out! They may be hovering over you, or you, or you!
In an effort to avoid typecasting, he took smaller parts in occasional non-horror films, films that showcased his versatility as a character actor. As challenging as this period was for Bela professionally, it was also rewarding for him personally. On January 5th, 1938, the 56-year-old actor and his wife Lillian enjoyed the arrival of their only child, Bela Lugosi Jr.
Benson, turn on the generator.
That same year, Universal Pictures began production on a third installment in their immensely profitable Frankenstein series, Son of Frankenstein. Second billed to the popular Basil Rathbone, Boris Karloff reprised his most famous role as the immortal monster. But the film's most outstanding moments were provided by Bela Lugosi's brilliant interpretation of the demented, broken-necked Igor.
You see that? They hanged me once, Frankenstein. They broke my neck. They said I was dead.
I can't mend a broken neck.
Nobody can mend Igor's neck. It's all right.
Son of Frankenstein was one of Universal Pictures' biggest hits of the year, and Bela Lugosi's performance helped to re-establish him as an actor of great ability. When America entered the Second World War, Lugosi spent considerable time assisting the war effort, often making personal appearances at military bases and factories, and in tongue-in-cheek newsreels, he urged the public to donate blood.
Here, for instance, is Bela Lugosi, the screen's #1 vampire who's decided to pay back some of that blood that he's borrowed. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a scene in which any actor really gives his best. Well, of all things, coffee and donuts. No, Bela, you mustn't. Remember your career. How can fans believe you're a werewolf if they've seen you dunking? Another illusion gone. It's getting so a man can't even believe in vampires anymore.
At home, Bela was a firm but loving father. And like his own father, he believed his son should possess good manners, discipline, and a fine education.
He was always teaching me about being honest, being hardworking, and I started military school when I was 6 years old. And I think that he felt that this was his duty to do that, to bring his son up to achieve. He loved his family. He paid a lot of attention to me when I was at home. His friends were artists and musicians, and so he would have parties where there would be, music and dancing and lively discussion. Dad collected stamps, so there'd be times which would be quiet time when he would be sitting there putting the stamps in the books. I also remember that he loved dogs, and we always had big dogs around the house. I have very nice memories about my father.
Now in his 60s, Bela Lugosi began suffering from debilitating leg and back pain. Pain that was not eased by the heavy costume and elaborate makeup he was required to wear for his next role, as the monster in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Of course, the grim irony of appearing in the role he had turned down a decade before did little for the aging actor's morale. What made matters worse was a last-minute decision on the part of studio executives to cut all of Lugosi's on-screen dialogue. Intended as a sightless creature possessing Igor's brain, the now-mute actor appeared to stumble about the sets in a laughable and seemingly unmotivated performance. It didn't help that much of that performance was most obviously accomplished with the aid of a very visible stuntman, Eddie Parker. Whether intentional or not, the result was tantamount to career sabotage.
The soul will wander through the night, and it will never find where her body rests.
In 1943, Bela reclaimed his Dracula cape in Columbia Pictures' Return of the Vampire. For copyright reasons, his character was called Armand Tesla, but fans had no difficulty recognizing the real Dracula when they saw him. Bela Lugosi could still command top billing, if not top wages. Unfortunately, most of the pictures in which he was asked to appear were Poverty Row quickies.
A lot of people say that he didn't have good career management, but on the other hand, that was just the way he was. He loved to work, and no matter what quality the picture was that he was in, he always gave a first-class performance.
And I feel myself going back to the animal instinct. I try to fight it. I lock myself in there with him, fearing that I might do something terrible.
One bright spot in this otherwise bleak period was offered by executives at RKO Studios. They thought that their production of Robert Louis Stevenson's The Body Snatcher would be aided immeasurably by the teaming of Bela with his old co-star, Boris Karloff.
That part was not in the original script. And then somebody in the front office decided, gee, wouldn't it be great if we could say Karloff and Lugosi? So that role of the porter was created to be able to cast Lugosi.
You and I should work together. You mean we would sell the bodies to the doctors together? Dig them up. There'll be no digging. The kirkyards are too well guarded.
Lugosi was not well at all in the picture. It was just a question of patience and working with Lugosi because of his health problem, whatever it was.
He had a leg pain problem that started many years back and had been prescribed some drugs for that pain, and he became medically addicted to those drugs.
This medical addiction was for now a well-kept Hollywood secret. Bela Lugosi was still capable of giving a fine performance. But in Hollywood, giving a fine performance is never enough. Bela Lugosi would have to give more. Now in his mid-60s and suffering from chronic back pain, Lugosi maintained an exhausting work schedule, one which included extensive touring in stock theater.
I appeared in Dracula, a production of Dracula in 1947 in a summer theater production with him. I was with him one night, and his wife was along, and he was talking about some of the things he'd done on the stage in Budapest, and his wife came in with, he was the John Barrymore of the Budapest stage. And with that, Lugosi broke in and very seriously said, no, I was the Clark Gable of the Budapest stage. And he was quite serious.
Count Dracula sleeps in this coffin, but rises every night at sunset. Chick is right. This is awful silly stuff.
In 1948, Bela accepted his last assignment for a major studio in Universal's send-up of Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman, the comedy classic Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Reprising the role that made him famous, Bela still managed to look vigorous and youthful. His performance was considered a triumph. But by now, the Gothic screen monsters of the 1930s were considered quaint and old-fashioned, especially when contrasted to the real horrors of World War II and the nuclear age. Far too old to play leading men and far too ill to play much else, Bela was often out of work.
The story is begun.
Desperate, he accepted a small role in an ultra-low-budget exploitation picture directed by a young man with more ambition than talent, Edward D. Wood, Jr.
If the Creator had meant us to be born girls, we certainly would have been born girls.
Are we sure?
The film was a bizarre and disjointed mix of transvestitism and pseudo-sociology.
Give this man satin undies, a dress, a sweater, and a skirt. He's the happiest individual in the world.
Bela's role was curious at best, but as usual, he gave it his all.
Beware of the big green dragon that sits on your doorstep. He eats little boys. Puppy duck tails and big fat snails. Beware. Take care. Beware.
Banned in several states due to its highly controversial subject matter, the film was a critical and box office disaster.
Ed Wood put him in his movies because of Dad's name. The movies that he put my father in were terrible, and I'm sorry to see him in those kind of movies, but looking at it from my dad's point of view, he was working. Ed Wood gave him something to do, which was really very important to him.
Master, it is the hour.
In 1953, Bela made a rare television appearance on the popular program You Asked for It.
You have no will of your own.
Just 5 years after his performance in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, Bela Lugosi could no longer hide the ravages of old age and the years of addiction to painkillers.
You ask for it.
Lonely, infirm, and impoverished, Bela Lugosi found that his only friends were the children that he had delighted for 2 decades as Dracula.
I discovered Bela in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I became his super fan. And there was a little group of kids. We got our nerve up and called on the phone. Told them that we were fans and we would like to meet him. He said, sure, come over, boys. And we did. And that's what started a 3-year glory trail of all kinds of adventures with him.
Unable to find suitable employment, Bela now worked exclusively for Ed Wood. Their next screen picture, Bride of the Monster, allowed the actor a final screen soliloquy that poignantly echoed his own compromised circumstances.
Now I am here, sent to bring you home.
I have no home. Hunted. Despised. Living like an animal. That I will show the world that I can be its master.
By 1954, Lugosi's lifestyle and chemical dependency had severely damaged both his health and his marriage.
It was very hard for both my mother and my father to separate and become divorced. They loved each other very much, but my mother just could not get along anymore with the way he was in his later years. My mother was always trying to help him not be addicted. She would administer the shots, and I know that she would give him shots with nothing in it from time to time, just to try and help him out. And all this took its toll.
Following the breakup of his marriage, Bela made several unsuccessful attempts to give up the morphine he had become addicted to. Finally, in the spring of 1955, he committed himself for treatment. Now out in the open, Lugosi's physical problems and pathetic circumstances earned him more press than he had received in years. But the images of Bela that were circulated all over the country were more frightening than any movie the actor ever made.
The newspapers, unfortunately, gave a kind of a tabloid touch to it all. You know, Dracula discovered to be drug fiend, that sort of thing, and it was rather humiliating. Actually, he was a rather brave individual.
To the public, Bela's distress seemed like the final curtain for a faded star. But the actor had made a career of rebounding from difficult circumstances. Bela Lugosi would be back. 3 months after his voluntary commitment to a state hospital for narcotic addiction, Bela Lugosi astounded the world with a full recovery. The seemingly rejuvenated 72-year-old actor was the first Hollywood star to ever go public with a drug-related problem.
Mr. Lugosi, you're leaving the state hospital tomorrow. Yes, I'm very happy I do, on account that I became a new man, new lease of life. I'm cured.
During his weeks of rehabilitation, Lugosi had received regular and encouraging mail from a woman by the name of Hope Lininger, a longtime fan who signed her letters, "A Dash of Hope." Upon his release, he sought her out, and soon Hope Lininger became the 5th Mrs. Bela Lugosi.
About 25 years earlier, she determined that one day she would be Mrs. Lugosi. Finally, indeed, her dream came true, but it turned out to be more of a nightmare to her, that the man that she married was not the handsome, charismatic Dracula that she had once dreamed of.
A conflict developed because Bela, with all his relationships with females, he was what we in Spanish would call macho. Hope was extremely dedicated to him. She took care of him, but she just didn't let him have that dominance in the household that he was apparently used to when he was married to Lillian. I feel that he was really still in love with Lillian all this time, and that Hope came in as a replacement.
Bela had hoped that his well-publicized recovery would result in goodwill and new offers from the entertainment industry. But while goodwill was plentiful, offers for work were not. Offers from anyone, that is, except Ed Wood. For a proposed film called The Vampire's Tomb, Wood photographed Lugosi walking around a nearby graveyard. It would later be incorporated into his 1959 cult classic, Plan 9 from Outer Space. But sadly, Bela's dreams of a comeback were not to be. On August 16, 1956, death came quietly to the 73-year-old actor who had made a screen career playing characters who never died.
He never did lose his pride. He knew what he had accomplished in his lifetime. Yet his circumstances were not good near the end of his life. I'm glad that he could be working all the way down to the end. He died with a script in his hand.
Bela had always said that he wanted to be buried in his cape, and Hope said, let's do it. And I said, well, if you're going to do that, then let's go all the way and send his full dress to the mortuary. And that's what he was buried in.
I remember standing by his coffin. I thought, well, Bela, it's almost as though you might expect a director to call cut and that you would rise from your coffin one more time. He looked very, very impressive in death.
To the very end, Bela Lugosi, the proud Hungarian who had run away from home at the age of 12 to become an actor, still believed fervently in the resurrection of his own career. Had he lived just a few more years, Bela Lugosi would have seen the beginnings of new interest in his films through television, magazines, and fan clubs. Appearing on everything from T-shirts to video cassettes, Bela and his films had become more popular than ever.
I don't think that he ever imagined that he would be remembered today, and he would really be very heartened to know that.
In 1995, actor Martin Landau received an Oscar for his inspired portrayal of Bela Lugosi in the film Ed Wood. But for many, it was a long overdue tribute, not only to Landau, but to Lugosi.
I wanted this to be not just a performance, but almost like the performance he never got at the end of his life. I understand the pain and the fact that he couldn't do at the end of his life what he wanted to do most, which was perform and act in good roles.
I think down deep, he knew that he was a good actor. So he just enjoyed this vampire thing that happened to him.
He was kind of haunted by it. He said something like, Dracula never dies.
If Bela Lugosi were alive today, I think he would have a proud smile on his face, knowing that he is regarded not only as a great actor by a great many people, but also as a great man.
With all his problems, he was a very human individual, and he was a good friend.
Just like his acting, he lived bigger than life. I remember my dad every time I see him on the screen. I still remember him.